Welcome, everybody, to this first installment of a series of STCA application showcases. In this presentation, I want to introduce you to the STCA method, or socio-technical configuration analysis, and how it helped us to analyze a case of a transitioning of a leading region in the global car industry, being exposed to a radical transformation of their technological core, namely the change from an internal combustion engine to the electric drivetrain. The case runs for Baden-Württemberg in Germany in the period from 2010 to 2023. But before entering into the substance matter, I want to inform you whether it's worthwhile to continue listening to this talk. So first, what is STCA? It's a method to retrace configurations of social and technical elements from coded documents. It builds on insights from event and social network analysis, and it has originally been developed in the context of transition studies. If you want to continue, perhaps it would be good to know that you need a bit of a basic understanding of what the method is. And for that, I refer you to the website of STCA with the guidebook and some introductory tutorials. And of course, it helps if you are looking for inspiration for a potential first own application case. The structure of my talk will be that I will talk about what was the research problem we wanted to address, what was the database and coding, how did we choose representative parameters for the networks, and finally, a few reflections on the insights gained. So the research problem that we addressed was in a paper with Hu and Gong, where we asked how can a leading region cope with a global socio-technical transition. So Baden-Württemberg in the south of Germany is one of the leading global automobile manufacturing regions that have to cope with transition towards the electric car. Perhaps remarkably for the Baden-Württemberg, it's considered to be the home of the internal combustion engine, and it calls itself also the cradle of the automobile. The transition, of course, has fundamental impacts on economic prospects, jobs in value chains, educational structures, industrial policies, or imaginaries. And so it's a really important question to ask. So the STCA was part of a broader set of empirical analysis that we did, in particular also a long series of interviews that Hu and Gong conducted. And STCA helped us to retrace the regional coping as reported in newspaper articles in this period. And we observe a sort of a coping cycle from denial to experimentation to finally acceptance. So how did the database look like and the coding? So first we draw on the Nexus Uni repository of newspaper articles and use the search term about future automobile and electric cars. And this resulted in 170 German articles, mostly from Stuttgarter Zeitung in the said period. The coding ended up with 36 concept codes, which were applied to 800 text segments. And it's noteworthy to say that it was a sort of a mixture of substantive and discursive codes. If you look at the coding tree, you see in the colors the sort of overarching units of analysis. So the red dots that you will see, also the notes, are representative for statements and activities that are supportive to the internal combustion engine and essentially claim that this will remain important in the future. The green is arguing for the electric vehicles being important in the future. Yellow relates to governance or government policies that would be needed. Blue is for the regional dimensions that were assumed. Labor markets is obvious. And light green ones refer to specific innovation strategies. As for the actors, we had 21 actor codes, and they were applied to 517 text segments. And you see it was about political parties, other car companies, the automobile industry, suppliers, academic research, and different levels of government. So just to give you an insight on how this looks like in MaxQDA, so here you have a typical view on the screen of MaxQDAs. You see the folders for the years in which individual newspaper articles were stored. And then below, you see the actors and the types of actors that are showed, and then the concepts. And what you see here is the representation of the red and the green nodes, which refer to ICE supportive or electric mobility supportive statements. So to the right hand, you see a typical text segment, which was here like coded as standing for ICE dominant future. And you also see the actor codes, who was mentioned in these statements to make this sort of, or resulted in this sort of codes. So now for drawing the networks, so we had to do a few choices. So first of all, for translating the cross-tabulation of actors and concepts into sort of similarity matrices, we used, and you will find this in the R scripts that are also on the website. So we used the cosine distance to respect the frequency of the codes in the layouts. We had the time slices, the coverage was from 2010 to 23 because the analysis ended end of 23. And before 2010, we found little or no references to the search terms. The periods were divided in from 2010 to 14 because that was sort of the emerging engagement with the topic before the Dieselgate broke. 2015 to 19 was sort of the hot period of the Dieselgate, where sort of confidence in the old trajectory dwindled. And 2020 to 23 was, of course, Corona and also sort of a normalization of the topic. As for the aggregation and sensitivity analysis, which we did in max QDA, so we used the lowest level of codes and segments. But if you want to see more about the sensitivity analysis, there's a tutorial on the website that goes into quite some detail based on this particular code example of Baden-Württemberg. As for the layout, we chose the layout of the zone, the centralized radial layout to see the core of the coverage, and we apply the backbone filter of 0.4 to eliminate minor links. So the results in a nutshell, you have here the first concept network, the one mode concept network for the first period. And what you see very clearly is that a big node in the center of the coverage is that electromobility is a relevant option. You see also the red ones, which are very near to the core and which essentially say that the internal combustion engine will still be dominant in the future, or at least not disappear. There's a lot of activity or references to policies, demonstration projects, support policies, research programs, etc. They're also in the core. And around this, you have the blue and the light green nodes, which represent sort of innovation activity. And as there's no priorities between them, and they are sort of similar sizes, are not too prominent, one can say that the specific reference to specific solutions and approaches were not very strong. What you also see here, in particular, is this cradle imaginary, which is very near to the core and to the assumption also that the IC will not disappear, etc. So this provides a sort of a clear picture of an emerging attention to this future option in the region. So in the second section, we see a period, we see here the Dieselgate, which emerges and has quite a prominent position, which means many actors refer to that. There's still this sort of belief that the internal combustion engine will remain dominant, that sits in the center. But now you see a lot of dominance on the labor markets, impacts on labor markets become much more prominent. You also see that the light green bulbs, they have moved to the center, so there's much more activity and discussion about battery development, charging infrastructure, autonomous cars is a sort of a topic that comes up, but also already in manufacturing and infrastructure investment. The other red dots, electric mobility niche is weak, or the IC will not disappear. They move a bit to the periphery, and we see among the green dots a first appearance of statements that say that electromobility will be the dominant future. So we see here a bit of a conflictual positioning among the different actors. In the last period, the situation changed in such a way that the core is sort of dominated by light green and blue elements. So it's really about how to implement it. Also, the statement that electromobility will remain dominant is part of the core at the end of the IC, that there's a transition needed, etc. But on the other hand, the red parts, the red dots, they are moving to the periphery, and even the statements about the IC being dominant in the future moves out to the absolute periphery of the coverage, and the same is true for the cradle imaginary. So, the main topic here is that electromobility will be dominant and has finally been achieved. Perhaps additionally, it's interesting to look at the one-mode actor networks, that underlie or are a complement to the one-mode concept networks. So they're built on the same database, but focus on how related statements and activities of actors are. And the remarkable thing here, it's for the coverage of the whole time period, but the picture doesn't change much over time, is that you see a very strong connection or positioning, co-positioning of the Baden-Württemberg government, the state government, Daimler as the major car company. We have some consultancies that are in here, trade unions, universities. So you have a very tight core of diverse actors. And we interpret that in such a way as this is a typical indicator for a sort of harmonious or almost harmonious development approach. So in the literature, it's also called a variety of coordinative variety of capitalism, where actors try to negotiate on the way to, about their joint future. So this brings me already to the end. So what are the lessons from the case that we can take? So first, the added value of the configurational approach in terms of empirics, where did it enable deeper insight into the case? So we can really nicely reconstruct the cycle from denial to experimentation to acceptance of the transition challenge. And we can also retrace how core topics and positions evolved over time. In terms of methodology, let's say compared to the insights we gained with interviews. So first of all, it's really comforting that the basic analysis is fully congruent with the expert interviews. Of course, the newspaper articles have a different perspective and a different inroad into the phenomenon, a different coverage also, but they prove to be very nicely complementary. And the STCA networks, they provide an aggregated view on how specific topics were mobilized by different actors. In terms of theory, so we could, corroborate some of the conceptual ideas that are around in these sort of fields, like that directionality, which can be sort of measured in a way as shifts in centrality of nodes. So regional imaginaries, core technologies, etc., how they changed over time. In terms of the geography of transitions, we can sort of interrelate socio-technical and regional aspects in a coherent framework. And as I alluded to already before, varieties of capitalism, we see this rather stable positioning of actors over time in the field. So essentially, this configurational mapping enables to retrace core dynamics in the field. And it is sort of a systematic way to do that, similar to what we normally do with expert interviews, but in a sense, we can be more transparent with regard to the interpretation of how we came to this sort of bigger patterns. Last slide on lessons from the case. So the methodological specificities of this case is, let's say, the data set, the newspaper articles that we had, is sort of very strongly based on local media with a rather homogeneous reporting on events. So it's not likely to provide the sort of very conflictual positions that you might see if you go to national newspapers or other kinds of media. The search string focused strongly on electromobility as a future options. So this has, of course, an impact of what we could see and what not. So perhaps other alternative technologies that were also in the discussion were perhaps a bit sidelined by the search term. We might have, due to the newspapers as a database, we might have some overrepresentation of major actors like Daimler or the state government that have a lot of resonance, of course, in the public sphere. And at the same time, perhaps an underrepresentation of less newsworthy events, but that were still equally important, Like, for instance, this electromobility Baden-Württemberg was a very important actor that came out from the interviews, but it was not so prominent in the newspapers. With regard to this case specificity, I would really say that this rather harmonious relationship between actors, this coordinated form of capitalism, is sort of a specificity. If you would have run the same, let's say, analysis in the Chicago region or Toronto region, which is equally hit by the electrification of the car, probably we would have seen different positionings of actors and different types of networks. Also, with regard to Baden-Württemberg, it's a globally leading region with a rather dominant technology core, the automobile. And of course, then you would also have more coverage than if it's just one among many technologies in a region that get challenged by transitions. With regard to the observation period, we think we have a very good coverage on the coping cycle. But of course, it's very hard to predict anything about the outcome of the race. So whether Baden-Württemberg will be successful in their approach to coping with the topic is, of course, for the future to see. Finally, a few specific learnings regarding the graphical depiction of the data. So there's doubtlessly always a key role of a solid coding tree. The coding tree is like the basic structure for everything that you will see later in the networks, etc. So it's very worthwhile to do a very good job in coding the data appropriately. We chose the radar plot, which provided some stability to the comparison over time. Of course, you always have to check with other layout procedures like stress minimization, so you don't overinterpret or misinterpret, let's say, overlays of nodes and stuff. And the last point is not to be underestimated. So for this visual inspection of data, the careful selection of colors is really important for the readability of the patterns. So if you want to see, as I said before, systematic variations of all sorts of these representational parameters, so go to see on the guidebook website, the STCA tutorial number 2, how to choose appropriate parameters in STCA applications. So let me conclude to thank the colleagues I have been working with to do this sort of analysis. Wen Gong, who did all the hard work in the expert interviews, and Alexia Dubuis, who supported me very strongly in the whole data management activities. As I said, you will find this video and slides on the STCA guidebook homepage, alongside with other resources like a step-by-step guide to how to apply the method, the R scripts, etc., some tutorial presentations, other showcases, a list of publications and student master's theses, and many more things. So have fun with your own experience with the method.